We all love a good redemption story, don't we? When we're watching the news and we see a story about a group of people who are overworked and underpaid, and they get redemption when the unethical business practices of the big corporate suits is found out, we cheer for that. We love it. Or think about maybe it's an underdog sports team for you, a team that has absolutely no chance of winning against their bigger, badder, oftentimes meaner opponent. But then they do win, and oftentimes it's in this epic play of the game moment, right? Redemption. But here's the thing. The way that we use this word in our everyday vocabulary, it's not the way that the original readers of Hosea would have understood this word. See, we redeem everything from monetary CDs to tickets at a Chuck E. Cheese counter to our reputation. But the original meaning of this word, it had a depth to it. It had a weight. It had a meaning that, quite honestly, most of us don't really have any experience with at all. And yet, maybe there's more there than we think. Well, go ahead and open up the word with me again, if you would, and I think you'll soon see what I mean. We're going to be in Hosea chapter 3. The text says this: "The Lord said to me, go show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, though they turned to other gods and loved the sacred raisin cakes. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about an omer and a lethek of barley. And then I told her, you are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way toward you." Now, I imagine that when God first called Hosea to marry a promiscuous woman, he probably had a lot of questions. Maybe he even pushed back a little bit. We don't really get to know what Hosea's response or reaction was to this calling. The only thing we know is that he obeyed. And then we learn that Hosea married Gomer. He provided a home for her. He provided all of her needs for her. And over the next several years, they started a family together. But sometime later, Gomer left Hosea, and she returned to her former life. But now we see that she didn't just return to a former lover. She actually sold herself into bondage to another man. Why would she do that, you ask? Well, what we're looking at here is essentially Hosea buying his wife at a slave auction. And there's really just one of three reasons why someone would find themselves on the auction block. One, your nation has been conquered and your people have been captured and you're being sold to add to the plunder. Two, your parents were slaves and so you were born into this trade. Or three, you got into a bad financial situation and you now owe people money. And so they can either make you work off your debt or they can sell you to get what they're owed. And this would be the case for Gomer. Yeah, she was a prostitute, that's true. But we get a lot of hints in the text that make it seem like she didn't make much of a profit. For example, Hosea had to provide all of her needs for her. If she had money of her own, she could just leave him and live on that. But instead, she leaves him because she's steeped in debt to another person. She has nothing. In fact, she has less than nothing. But let's talk about this price that Hosea paid here. We have the value of the barley plus the 15 shekels of silver, and all of this together would be about 30 shekels of silver. And there's a few significant notes that I want to make about this price. First of all, Numbers chapter 5 shows us that a barley offering would have been offered as part of the sacrificial system if a wife was suspected of adultery. In this case, confirmed. Also, according to Exodus 21:23, 30 shekels of silver was the compensation to be paid if a slave was killed by a neighbor's property. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Gomer is in the exact same situation as a slave here, but this does mean this is a legal transaction. She's in some kind of bondage, she owes this person money, and so Hosea is here to clear her debts in order to bring her home with him. But this price, in this day and in this time, the equivalent of 30 shekels of silver would have been about a half year's wages. That's a lot of money. And interestingly, it would not have been commonplace for someone to buy a slave with barley, which likely means Hosea was having a hard time coming up with the money. But here he is, doing everything that he can. And so you might be thinking, surely Hosea is ready to throw in the towel at this point. I mean, imagine the anger and the frustration that he must have felt to have to go and buy back someone who belonged to him in the first place. It's wild. But here's another thought. It would have been very common for slaves sold at auction to be stripped of their clothing, or very nearly so. And suddenly God's words in chapter 2 are coming back to us. He said, "So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers." That certainly rings true here. And so as Hosea is looking on Gomer in this extremely vulnerable situation, his wife, the mother of his children, sure, maybe he was angry, but it's also entirely possible that he was simultaneously filled with sorrow and even compassion. And so in obedience, once again, Hosea places the winning bid, and he takes Gomer home. Now you understand at this point that Hosea actually owns Gomer. She is his property, she is his slave, but that doesn't seem to be his intent with her. Look back at his words. We do have this phrase, "for many days," and that's a common indication of punishment. There are consequences for our actions, and Gomer is no exception. But then he's quick to follow that with, "For many days I will be faithful to you, so please be faithful to me." See, Hosea has redeemed her. And this is a word that literally means buy back. A word that literally comes from this very scene that we're looking at here. A slave auction. But I want you to understand something here. Hosea does not redeem her in order to demean her. No, he has paid the highest price for her because of his great love for her. I told you from the beginning, this prophet has the hardest calling of them all. But what about Israel? What does the Lord God have to say about their adulterous ways? Are they redeemable? They are. And it's been God's plan all along. Let's look back at the very beginning of this book. We started out by learning that Hosea's children were given prophetic names by God. Jezreel means God scatters. Lo-Hurama means no mercy. Lo-Ami means not my people. This was then followed by Hosea's judgment of Gomer when she leaves him for her unfaithful ways. But even when we were reading Hosea's words to Gomer, it's like we were hearing God's words to Israel. Gomer would lose her protection and her provision by walking away from her true husband, and the same is true for Israel. Look at verses 8 and 9. It says, "She has not acknowledged that I was the one who gave her the grain, the new wine and oil, who lavished on her the silver and gold. Therefore I will take away my grain when it ripens, and my new wine when it's ready. I will take back my wool and my linen, intended to cover her naked body." Is this Hosea talking to Gomer? Yes. But is this God talking to Israel? Yes. Layers, remember? Like Gomer, Israel lost her protection and her provision for a time, but she never lost her pursuer. Let's start reading again in verse 13. It says, "I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares the Lord. Therefore what? Therefore disease? Therefore decay? Death? That makes sense? No, therefore I am now going to allure her." But what? Yes, I'm going to allure her, he says. "I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. There I will give her back her vineyards, and I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. I will remove the names of the Baals from her lips. No longer will their names be invoked. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. Wow. Here at Ozark Christian College, we teach our students that when they're studying the Bible and they come across the word therefore, they should always ask the question, what's the therefore there for? And in this specific instance, that therefore is there for only one thing. Redemption. So let's unpack God's unexpected yet incredible response right here. We'll start in verses 14 and 15. This leading Israel into the wilderness and speaking tenderly to her, that is a direct allusion to the Israelites' 40 years in the wilderness. It was supposed to be a time of renewal and restoration of God to his people after decades of them being in slavery in Egypt. He spoke life into them. He provided life for them. He even gave them the law so that they could have a righteous life moving forward. And now God says, I will do it again. I will remind Israel of who I am, and I will remind her of my love for her. Well, then we have verse 16. Remember when we talked about Hosea's declaration of divorce from Gomer, a complete breaking of covenant? But God doesn't want to be broken off from his people. And so he not only doesn't declare divorce right here, but what he does do is he declares a renewal of vows. He says, you will call me husband. This is then followed by verse 19. When a betrothal would take place in this time, there was always a dowry that was offered. And this would just be a gift of great price, sometimes money, sometimes objects. But it was the groom's way of making known to the bride's family, I have what it takes to take care of her. Well, right here, God doesn't give us a typical dowry. It's very different. There's no physical items. There's no money being exchanged. But look at these words. Just and righteous, these are characteristics of our holy God. Love and compassion, these are gifts of mercy that Israel does not deserve. Lavish gifts indeed. See, God himself, a relationship with him, that is the betrothal gift. And it's pretty unfathomable when you consider this tumultuous relationship. Well, we also talked about the rebellious nature of Israel in being apathetic. They didn't care to know God. In being afraid, they gave their allegiance to other nations. In being adulterous, they worshiped false gods. We'll look back at verses 17, 18, and 20 here. We see all of these issues being set up and knocked down, but let's take these in backwards order. We'll start with verse 20. It says, they will acknowledge God. And this time, it's genuine. This word for acknowledge right here, it's a word that means intimacy, a real relationship. Well, then in verse 18, it says their enemies that they've had to fear in the past, and even the hidden enemies that they should have feared, but they aligned with instead, all of them are going to be shut out, and God's people will finally experience rest. And in verse 17, the names of those lifeless, mindless, powerless gods are going to be completely forgotten. This is a total flip of the script. This is redemption. But look, the best part is still ahead. Let's keep reading in verse 21. It says, in that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth. And the earth will respond to the grain and the new wine and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. You see it, don't you? This is a hearkening back to the names of Hosea's children. Jezreel means scatters and sows. And when God gave Hosea's son that name, it was a foretelling of them being exiled and intermingled with other nations. Not good. But now God says, I will respond to that scattered seed, and something good will grow here again. And then verse 23 brings about direct redemption to the other son and daughter. I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. I will say to those called not my people, you are my people. And I don't know about you, but I cannot help but hear the Apostle Peter's words in 1 Peter 2:10. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Friends, here's the bottom line. God's faithfulness is more powerful than Israel's unfaithfulness. And that is good news, not just for them, but for all of us. This is a real, a true, a good redemption story. Now, I know that this has been quite a roller coaster of emotions. It has been mind-boggling and heart-wrenching, and it's not over yet. So come back and join me next time as we look at Hosea's final illustration and his final plea with Israel to lean in, to respond to God's faithful, redemptive care.